Hello and welcome back to another episode of the podcast Little Girls Aren't Taught This. I am Lydia, a somatic trauma-informed psychotherapist, and I am on a mission to just help women come back to their bodies so they can find safety and peace. And I specialise in self-love work and body image work. So welcome if you are new here, and if you are not new here, welcome back to another episode. Today is a little bit of an informative episode, more like a psychoeducation episode, and I'm going to be talking through attachment theory. So attachment theory is something that is really helpful to understand when it comes to understanding yourself on a deeper level. I think attachment is something that everybody should know about, but not everybody knows about. And essentially it is, the way that we connect in relationships. So whether that's friendships, whether that's intimate relationships, or whether that's family around us, essentially our attachment is how we form emotional bonds with others. And this is really important because this stems back a lot to our early development years. So when we think about our early childhood years, when we think about our mothers, our caregivers, our fathers, our siblings, they are the first people that we had to form attachments with. So when we think about attachment styles, a lot of this is going back to our childhood, and it's things that we see play out now in our adulthood. So one of the things I do want to say is, if you find this episode like it resonates and you want to learn more about it, there is actually a book, I will put it in the show notes, called Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Hellier. And you can actually go ahead and get that book. And what it does is it explains a little bit more in depth, but in like a really digestible way, what attachment theory is and how you see that play out as an adult. And actually how you can start to change your attachment style so you can really form secure attachments with people and keep lasting, loving relationships in your life. That's the first thing. The second thing is that if you want to know your own attachment styles after listening to this episode, there is a test that you can do online. So if you just go into Google and just type attachment style testing, it will come up. Again, I will link that in the show notes so you can do that. So let's jump into it. So attachment styles, I've just spoke a little bit about what they are, the way that we form emotional bonds with others in the context of our early caregiver relationship. So there's going to be a few sections that I go into in this podcast. The first one is talking through what attachment styles are. I'm going to go into the 4 different types of attachments that we have and the impact that they have on relationships and connection. Then in the second part, I want to go into how you can start to change your attachment styles, giving you some practical steps that you can do. And then the third part, I actually want to go into how trauma impacts attachment, because I think it's really important. A lot of these topics are very nuanced. It's not just black and white when we're talking about self-understanding, when we're talking about understanding ourselves as humans, understanding the people around us and the things that we've been through. And to leave out, the element of trauma in some of these episodes almost feels like it's doing potential listeners a disservice, because trauma brings so many different nuances to these things that we talk about. It brings so many different complexities to these topics, and it just feels really important to almost give space to that in these episodes. So that's going to be the last part of the podcast episode. So jumping into it. So there is 4 different types of ways that we attach to people. So there is secure, anxious, avoidant, and fearful-avoidant. The biggest one that I see in women that I work with is anxious attachment. I think the biggest one that I see in males is avoidant attachment. Okay, so I'm going to go into each one of these, and you start to see why it's really important that you understand your attachment styles, because it's really significant in terms of the dynamics in your relationships right now, especially your intimate relationships. If you are somebody that is anxiously attached and you are with somebody who is avoidant, that is just going to be a really conflicting, jarring relationship. And as I go into each attachment style, you'll understand why. So something that's really nice to do is to understand what your attachment style is, and if you are in a relationship or with anybody that's important to you, understanding their attachment styles. So the first one I want to talk about is anxious attachment. This is just so big for women. It's probably so big for a lot of men also, but obviously I primarily work with women, and it's something that I've seen play out so much. It's something I myself have experienced. In my late teens, early 20s, I was very anxiously attached. And the reason being is because I had very little self-worth. So when somebody is anxiously attached, they often experience higher levels of anxiety and worry about their partner's availability and commitment, okay? So again, one of the things that I want to make really clear is anxious attachment is our responsibility. It's nothing... When I say it's nothing to do with our partners, what I essentially mean by that is it's not something our partner causes, because our attachment styles are formed in our formative years, which means by the time we get into our adulthood, by the time we get into that space in our life where, you know, we're forming intimate relationships, we're forming friendships, these attachment styles are pretty much already there. They're already ticking over. They're already having some power in how we connect to people in our teenage years, in our adult lives. Obviously, our partners, the things that they do and the people in our lives, they will do behaviours that might potentially heighten the level of anxiety or avoidance that we feel, you know, that really play into those attachment styles. Maybe they reconfirm those attachment styles that we have with some of their behaviours. But what's really important to understand is that when you listen to this podcast episode, not to go away and go, it's my partner that's making me anxiously attached, because this is like an individual thing within us, and every single person has their own attachment style. So when you're anxiously attached, often what we see, and this is why it's so big with women, this stems from people who have little trust and little self-worth. So because they have very low self-worth, what that means is they really, really fear abandonment. They strive to consistently feel secure, and the way that they get that security is through validation. So whether that's validation with their friends, with their family, you know, with their intimate partners, and you see this play out, expectations. This is where you see a big part of this play out, and also people-pleasing tendencies. You see this play out in people who are anxiously attached. So you experience those high level of anxiety and worry about your partner's availability and commitment. So you're preoccupied all of the time with what your partner is doing. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to reference, I'm just going to reference it in the sense of intimate relationships. But these are so relevant to, like I've touched on, family and friendships as well. So you see that preoccupation with when you're, you know, constantly thinking about what your partner's doing, constantly thinking about their level of commitment, and constantly worrying and thinking about their level of availability to you. And you see that on the surface manifest as those little feelings of anxieties, okay? When you anxiously attach, you seek a lot of reassurance and validation from your partner to feel secure. So again, you don't have that resource internally for you to feel secure, because if there's a lack of self-worth there, that means you don't feel secure in who you are as a person. So you externally look for that in the person that you're with. And the reason being is because you may fear abandonment, and the abandonment can be something deeper that stems from childhood, or it could just be a fear of, I'm not worthy, maybe I don't deserve this love. Another side note about abandonment, and I think this is very big for women, that fear of abandonment can also come in, you know, seeing those true selves, those parts of self. So I recently on Instagram spoke about the masks that we wear and the amount of women that I work with now, and I'm seeing that they're just behind all of these different masks. The way that they show up in the world, the way that they connect with people, the expectations that they're trying to live up to. And actually what that means is a lot of my clients don't understand who they are. When I ask that question of who are you, they're like, I don't know, Lydia, because I just go out into the world, and for as long as I can remember, I've just fit into all of these different boxes. So when we think about that in terms of like our own identity and our own sense of self, if we don't know who we are and we are fearful of showing people a peep behind the mask that we wear, and often when people are looking behind that mask, what they're seeing is those shadow sides of us, that fear, that grief, that shame, that vulnerability, those insecurities, the things that we're fearful of, we're afraid of, the things that we've done wrong, the way that we've hurt ourselves and others. They're the shadow parts of us, and often what we do is we hide those behind layers and layers of masks because we don't want people to see that, because what essentially we're fearful of is if they see me, they're not going to love me anymore, or they're not going to accept me. So it links into this acceptance and this fear of not being accepted by the people that we love the most in the world if we show who we truly are. And that is something that in itself is driving that sense of, please don't abandon me. Because if I show you who I am, I don't want you to abandon me. I don't want you to leave me. So abandonment comes up in so many different ways. It's not just linked to abandonment in the sense of how we may perceive abandonment. Somebody leaving us, maybe a father, a mother, somebody that we love, they left us in the past. It can be so multi-layered, and that's why I think it's really beautiful that when you start to do this work on yourself, you understand what these things mean for you, because they're so multi-layered and nuanced. So abandonment, what it can mean for one woman can mean something totally different for another woman. So essentially, if these drivers are playing out and they're the things that are driving our behaviours and driving the way that we attach to people, we're going to be looking for that external proof that we are secure, okay? And the people that we look to give us that sense of security, if we cannot do that ourselves, are our partners. So, and it's if we don't get that level of security, that then triggers the anxiety, and that may feed into that external thing that could be playing out deep-rootedly of, please don't abandon me. So as a result, what you might see in somebody who is anxiously attachment is an over-dependency on their partners, and they become overly sensitive to any kind of rejection or distance. So if your partner is spending time on their own, you may then internalize that as, he doesn't want to be with me, he doesn't love me anymore. And I think actually, again, I see this play out a lot in the women that I work with, because we are so insecure, because you are so insecure, or a lot of women that I work with are so insecure, that any distance they feel like potentially is a sign that their partners aren't interested in them anymore, which again it's such a big feedback loop into this notion of, oh my God, he's potentially rejecting me. When there's distance as well, you see this play out in internalizing that, as in, there's something wrong with me, why doesn't my partner want to spend time with me? And this can be seen as that clingy behavior, that overly dependence, where your whole sense of identity kind of becomes merged and wrapped up into your partner and into that relationship. And you see this play out in friendships. If your friend has other friends and you feel yourself getting really jealous of that, and almost like that's a threat to the role that you play, or how important you are to your friend, that's another sign that you see that anxiety playing out. So I've experienced anxious attachment in my late teens, early 20s, because I literally had such little self-worth. I would do everything that I could to almost control that dynamic of the relationship. So you wouldn't see it play out in, I don't think, massively unhealthy ways, maybe now, if I reflected back on that behaviour properly, if I remembered it. But for me, it would just play out more in, if my partner went out at the time, I would feel really fucking triggered by that, and I would actually it would impact my whole mood. I would be funny with him, I would not text him back, I would be in a strop for days after. And the reason being is because that distance made me feel threatened. And also the fact that my partner was out having a good time without me made me feel very threatened. And if I think back to the cause of that, it was the lack of self-worth and the fact that I didn't feel secure in myself, and also the fact that there was no trust. in the relationship, which meant it was impossible for me to feel secure and attached secure in this relationship. As a young woman. So that's the ways that I've seen that manifest in my own life. And, that can be some of the ways that I see it play out with clients as well, is when there's this sense to overly control things. Now, I think the thing is a lot of the time when, we're operating from an anxious attachment, we don't realize that what we're doing is stemming from a place of anxiously being attached, feeling like there could be a part of us that's abandoned, or feeling insecure in the love that we receive, and worrying about, availability, our partner's availability to us and commitment and stuff. But the way that we see that manifest on the surface is these really controlling behaviours. And when I say controlling, I essentially mean when you want to know what your partner's doing, when you want to know where your partner is, when you get a mood on that your partner's going out and you feel threatened by that, and you then project that onto your partner, that's really a behaviour where you're trying to gain control. Because if your partner then decided to stay in with you, you wouldn't be feeling that way. We can see it in terms of probably a lot of stuff to do with phones, checking phones, going through search history. This is where you start to see that there's really no trust. And often when there's no trust, obviously it can be due to our partner's behaviours, but a lot of the time it stems or our own insecurities, our internal drivers for the things that we're doing. And then you start to add in the behaviours that our partners are doing on top of that. And then it's just literally like an automatic feedback loop that's happening in your mind and emotionally that's causing you to do these behaviours. And you're probably doing them without so much awareness anyway. But that's really where you see those behaviours start to play out of when you're anxiously attached to somebody. And having that sense of anxiety around potentially who your partner is, following on Instagram. If your partner's got any male or females in their lives and they're quite close to them, if you feel threatened by that, even if it's not crossing any boundaries or it's not doing anything that's deemed inappropriate, if you feel yourself get threatened by that, that's a sign that you could be anxiously attached. And then also that there's, some deep-rooted work to do around self-worth and feeling secure in yourself, so then you can attach securely to people. So when you also have anxious attachment, it can lead to quite big emotional outbursts that may seem stemmed from really, really insignificant things, or maybe they're not stemmed, from anything at all, but you just feel like because you're operating so much on uncertainty and anxiety, and think about the almost the impact that has on your nervous system, and then how if you love somebody, feeling and worrying if they don't love you back, almost the impact that's emotionally going to have, and the driver that's going to be happening that's keeping your nervous system in that space of consistently feeling anxious about the relationship. It's almost like there's never a point where you can fully drop in and rest and feel secure in that relationship that you're in. So that can cause emotional outbursts as well. And your relationship can be marked by highs and lows. So you again will hear this often, people say, oh, when we're good, but when it's bad, it's bad, or when we have lows, it's really low. And that's a sign that you're anxiously attached to somebody, or that there could potentially be two anxiously attached people in that relationship if you consistently find that you have these massive highs and lows. And then, you need a constant reassurance or attention from your partner. If you don't get reassurance and you don't get attention, again, if that triggers something within you, that could be a sign that you're anxiously attached to your partner. So I think that really it just makes so much sense why a lot of women that I work with are anxiously attached. And why for me, I think that when I done all of this work on, myself and a lot of the self-love work, I was able to switch over into a very secure attachment. And, you know, I think the reason being is because I now have the resources inside of me to feel so secure. And I think it's how you look at other people's behaviours. So when you're able to securely attach with people in an intimate setting, it almost means that the behaviours that they do, you see as a reflection of them, and you no longer need to like micromanage your partner in order for them to make you feel the way that you want to feel. So when you're anxiously attached, that's, like I said before, that's where that element of control comes in, because you try to control any outcomes because you just want to feel secure, and that control gives you a false sense of security. It's not security, it is control. And that could be, you know, unhealthy ways that it's coming out. And this is what I used to see a lot in probation with the male offenders, is you will see a lot of the domestic violence perpetrators, so fucking many of them are anxiously attached. And that is why they, you know, go down the route of these very unhealthy, very controlling behaviours, because a lot of them have fear of abandonment. And I think especially with the backgrounds that they come from, a lot of them have this fear of abandonment. So they control everything that they can. Now, I'm not saying that the things that, if you listen to this, the things that you do are anywhere near the same as that. But I think any behaviours that we do to try and control outcomes is essentially a sign that we're trying to manipulate a situation to feel secure. And we can do that from a place that we're not even aware of. You know, that can be a totally unconscious thing that we're doing. It's just there ticking over in the background. You never actually think in your head, oh, I'm going to control my partner because I want to feel secure. But this is why it's really, really important, if anything is resonating, for you to then really just sit with that and get totally honest with yourself. And that honesty, that radical honesty, looking at yourself in the mirror, if that part is resonating about those controlling behaviours, is you know, it's a part of you bringing your shadow into play. And you do that from a space of try to do that from a space of non-judgment. We all have these different parts that play out, and I think the more aware of you are of your part, the easier it is, and the more it's going to help you switch over into a secure attachment. So the next one is avoidant attachment. This is what I think we see a lot of men operate in. So people with avoidant attachment tend to emphasize independence. You also see this operating in hyper independent people, which can be a trauma or stress response. Again, one of the reasons why I think it's very important to just have a touchstone of trauma in here, because this one I think is very, very relatable to a lot of people I've worked with trauma. So emphasize independence and self-reliance. You may downplay the importance of close relationships and avoid emotional intimacy. Now, if you imagine for one moment you have somebody in a relationship who's anxiously attachment, who wants emotional intimacy and can be quite clingy, in a relationship with somebody who's avoidant, who wants to avoid it, that's why you just will see these consistent emotional blowouts come up, because you have two people whose attachment styles are just going up against each other and quite jarring and quite conflicting, which means the other person feels like they're never getting their needs met and doesn't feel secure in the way that they're forming attachments. So they often feel uncomfortable with emotional vulnerability, and you may suppress or dismiss your own feelings. So when someone is avoidant, a part of that is being, you know, dismissive to intimacy, dismissive to feelings, dismissive to needs, dismissive to wants, and you can tend to dismiss that. And you may struggle to fully open up to your partners, maintaining a certain level of emotional distance. So again, think about that in terms of you, or think about that in terms of, the people in your lives. I think a lot of people, this will resonate with parents from older generations and also grandparents, keeping that distance. And I think especially for women, a lot of if I think about the older generations of women, a lot of that strong, independent female has led a lot of women to have avoidant attachments. I speak to so many women who grew up in households where emotions were never spoken about, or if they ever spoke about emotions, it was shut down. And you see this a lot with men and their dads as well. You see that avoidant, dismissive attachment, and you see it play out where there's not that level of emotional intimacy between father and son. And I think it's a very big thing as well between mothers and daughters, I think, from those older generations. So if you do resonate with that, that could be an explanation as to why you just really wanted a level of emotional connection with your parents or people in your life, and you just quite don't feel like you quite get it. Or maybe someone said to you that they feel like there's always that level of distance between you and how you show up in space and how you connect with people. And that this can be a reason why. So dismissive of own emotions means that, again, you can be quite dismissive of your partner's emotions, your partner's wants and needs, when your partner's coming to you and trying to talk through things and experiences, almost feeling like it doesn't have a space in the relationship and it's not worth talking about. And these tendencies can create challenges in forming deep emotional connections and lead to a fear of intimacy. Now, of course, your attachment style, again, is going to be so nuanced in how it's formed in terms of what your childhood upbringing was. So your upbringing is going to have so much relevance in how you attach to people, because you just see avoidance again play out with a lot of clients that I work with, where it stems back from childhood and it stems back from fear and being emotional, growing up in a household where they couldn't talk about things and nobody ever spoke about things. And it's really interesting, because if I reflect on my nana, she was probably quite avoidant in her attachment styles, but always felt so loved by her. So again, I think it can show that we can flick between certain attachment styles, so we can show up, and it doesn't just mean we have to be very black and white in terms of how we attach to people. But she would never get vulnerable with her emotions. She would never talk about her feelings. I think if we spoke about our feelings, she would listen, and she would be that nana who listened and was really there for us. But I always remember it being you can do it though, you'll be fine. Not in a way that's dismissive, that minimizes, just in a way that it seemed uncomfortable with that vulnerability, with that level of emotion, talking about emotions, didn't really know what to say. And I wondered if she ever had that space held for her where she could openly talk about emotions. So that's avoidant attachment, fear of intimacy, struggling to form deep emotional connections, very dismissive of own emotions and other people's. And there's a whole host of things challenges that come from that in a relationship when you are with somebody who's avoidant, or if you are avoidant. So the next one is fearful and avoidant attachment. So people with fearful avoidant attachment, disorganized attachment, it's also known as. So these people are a mix of anxious and avoidant, and it means that they desire close relationships, but you may fear rejection and abandonment. So you want to be close with somebody, but that fear can also make you keep a little bit of distance. So we were talking about with the avoidant one, it means that you have a mix of both and you can flip between the two. So you may have experienced inconsistent caregiving during childhood, and what that can mean is you can be quite confused and not really feel secure, in the sense of feeling like people at any point could just leave you and walk away. And it means that you may flip between seeking closeness and then pulling away when you feel overwhelmed or threatened. So this is probably a big one that you see in the dating scene. You know, I've spoke to people, or I've heard stories before of when people ghost people, where, you know, people can really connect on dates. People can really feel like they're getting somewhere with somebody, and then just like overnight, it can just that person will just cut contact. And this can be a sign that they are a fearful/avoidant attachment, because they really do desire that, but then when it starts to get too close, they feel really threatened. I think this is a big one as well for people who are behind so many masks, behind people who are trying to keep a facade up, behind people, for people who are really fearful of being seen to the point where they would rather just keep distance between people, are fearful of letting people in because they don't want to be hurt, but they really, really desire, they crave that intimacy. They know that they want a relationship, but when it starts to get too much and too close, they pull away. You see this all the time in movies where, you know, when it gets to the point where people start to fall in love, one of them, and, you know, it's usually depicted as the male, will pull away from the woman. And it's often that reason, because people are getting too close. So their behaviour can be unpredictable, which is kind of what I was just explaining, and it can be quite contradictory. So again, this is what we're talking about, where somebody at one point can seem all in, but then they don't text you for like a week, and you don't know where you stand with them. When they're with you, they feel like they're really connected, like there's a potential future that you get on, but then they pull away from you. If you're in a long-term relationship, you can see this play out again, where, you know, you feel that closeness, but then there'll be a distance, and you just feel that from a person. You feel like they've pulled away. Maybe you're in a relationship with someone, and, you know, there is that connection, but vulnerability, like real, true, honest human vulnerability, makes them pull away, and you feel them disconnect and pull away in the relationship, which can make it feel quite contradictory. So again, if this is, you know, if we're reflecting this on you as a person, I think just looking at your own behaviours, are you quite hot and cold with the way that you blow, and can you say things, or have you ever heard anybody say to you like you contradict yourself with what you say you want, because that can make it challenging to establish a stable relationship, with a partner. And also a trust and connection, because again, if you think about it, if you've experienced that inconsistent caregiving during childhood, you're going to project that out into the world with this disorganized attachment, which means then for it's going to be hard for that person that you're connecting with to trust that to trust in you. My sense is that would probably trigger somebody into an anxious attachment, which again, if you think about that, those two together would just be very like conflicting in a relationship. So the last one I want to talk about is secure. Now, this is the one that, you know, you want to be doing the work to get to. So when you have a secure attachment, you have high self-worth and you have trust in other people. So you feel comfortable expressing your needs and your wants and your emotions, and you believe that your partner will be responsive and supportive in that. And the same goes for your partner. You're okay with your partner expressing their needs and wants, and you don't feel threatened by that if your partner comes to you with something that they want to discuss about maybe you or the relationship, because you have a high sense of self-worth and you just feel trusting. These relationships are usually formed on, strong emotional bonds, usually quite healthy attachments. You're able to communicate effectively and you're able to handle conflict in a constructive manner. So if I just compare this to when I was in my anxious attachment days, I didn't communicate. I would just fly off the handle. I would probably not talk to my partner. I didn't know how to handle conflict, so everything would just be an argument. And now I'm very much able to just communicate without, being in that high emotional space. I'm able to process how I'm feeling. And then when I'm ready, I'm able to come into space and communicate that. And I'm able to handle conflict in a way that doesn't result in it coming to mass arguments or, blows in the relationship. And usually, apart from like quite, important things that come up, I'm just like quite cool just in the relationship. Like nothing really triggers me. I'm quite secure. I'm secure with like just, doing my own thing, my partner doing his own thing, and then coming back into space and being in that like that unity of the relationship, and also very much having my own sense of identity. And this is another sign of a secure attachment. You both seek emotional closeness, but you also value independence. So you can come together, but then you're not afraid to go away and be independent, because like the anxious attachment, that doesn't trigger this worry about their availability or their commitment. So that just leads, when you're in a secure attachment, to a much more fulfilling and stable relationship. So that is essentially what you want to aim for in your attachment. And you can get there, and I believe that you can get there, because I used to be very anxiously attached, and now I am securely attached. And I truly believe it's because of the work, I've done on myself. So when I first got with my partner, I would notice things about his attachment styles that he would try to project onto me, but because I was very secure, and I've always as well had, him say things to me like, does that not bother you? And I'm like, no, like it really doesn't bother me. Outside things, like if girls try to hit on him and stuff, I'm like, it just honestly doesn't bother me. I don't get like jealous. I don't feel a certain way about it. I'm just aware that it's part of life and it happens. Obviously, if someone oversteps a boundary, that's a different thing, or if my partner overstepped a boundary. But all in all, it's not a big thing, because I feel very secure in that connection, and I feel secure to myself, and I feel secure in the unity of our relationship and, the love that I receive. So I'm going to go in a little bit to how these attachment styles can impact the dynamic and quality of relationships, but I already feel like I've touched on it, to be honest. But I just wrote out a couple of points. So secure individuals, secure people tend to have healthier and more satisfying relationships. You can navigate conflict effectively and experience greater emotional intimacy. When you're anxious, you may find yourself in a relationship with someone who's avoidant, which can lead to cycles of emotional distance, and then, pursuing that person. You see that play out a lot in relationships, where there might be a word for it, but it honestly escapes me, where a partner pulls away. Often it's the man that pulls away and the woman will chase. So you see that play out where there's periods of distance and then pursuit, and then distance and then pursuit. And when they come back together, it's like a false sense of security, because it can't last long if you're with somebody who is avoidant, because that literally will trigger them when you are close to them. So that will give, the anxious person like a false sense of security. And then when it gets too much for the avoidant partner, they'll pull away again. So that need for constant reassurance and fear of rejection might, can put a big strain on a relationship. Someone who's avoidant, like I've said, difficulty forming deep connections, maintaining emotional intimacy, leading to distant and less fulfilling relationships. So it doesn't mean that you can't have relationships. You can. It just means that it won't feel fulfilling. Like you won't feel like you're seen, you won't feel held, you won't feel safe in that relationship. And it can just be like when two people are together, but there's a lot of distance. And, maybe it feels like you don't know the person that you're with, or they don't feel like they know you, because you won't let them get close enough to you. And people who are fearful and avoidant, they experience a lot of internal conflicts. Again, noticing this for self, do you experience a lot of internal back and forth around, does it feel like there's two parts of you? There's one part of you that really wants to be connected with somebody, that wants that intimacy, that wants that connection, that wants to be in a relationship. Then maybe there's a part of you that's like, no, I do not want that. And then when you connect with somebody that you like, for some reason you wake up one day and you're like, oh, I don't like that. And I think this is where we see, honestly, the culture of like, oh, it gives me an ick. I feel like a big part of that is when people are in this attachment style and they just link these icks to waking up one day and not liking this person. Like, obviously there's things that can put us off people in terms of attraction, but if we look at it from like a deeper emotional connection, the way that we're with people, I feel like the people are so, nowadays the culture that we live in, people are so fucking unbelievably disconnected from others, but they're so unbelievably disconnected from self. I think there's a lot of perceived self-connection, doing the work, doing the things, but actually I think at the root of us, I think there's massive disconnection. And I think we see these trends happen, and these things happen, like the ick trend, and actually that's just a manifestation of the fact that a lot of people are in this fearful avoidant attachment style. They want connection, but they're so afraid because of the way that the culture is nowadays, of being hurt, of being played, of being made to look like a fool, that they just wake up one day and be like, oh yeah, the jeans that he was wearing just give me an ick. Because I'm like, it doesn't really make sense what you're saying. And I really actually see this have played out with my boyfriend's sister. There was a part of her that wanted to be in a relationship, but then any single time she would meet somebody, if he was like funny, he made her laugh, she would then phone me and just be like, no, give me the ick. And I'd be like, what? And it was always around the time, where she couldn't keep up that self that she'd been portraying, and they were getting that little bit closer to her. So that's another way that you may see it play out. So that is on attachment styles, and I think really what's important to understand is the reason why I give some little snippets of my own experience is because they 100% can change over time. You can go from anxious avoidant, fearful avoidant to secure, especially when there's personal growth and therapeutic support involved. And when you understand your attachment style and its impact, it can be valuable for improving communication and also like fostering more fulfilling relationships and connections with the people around you. So if you notice that you're anxious, it's like if something comes up in a relationship, lean into that and communicate that. Communicate how it's making you feel and maybe the reason for it, and communicate how your partners can secure you, or your friends or your family can secure you and can support you, into shifting into a secure attachment. And also it's really important if you're single, because what you want to be doing is connecting with somebody and choosing a partner who is compatible with your attachment needs, and then they can support you, like I've just said, in growing in that relationship and growing together. So if you notice that you're with somebody now who's one of the three that's not secure, it's not about judging them for that. It's about, holding that space and, they holding space for you. But it's like also linking back to what I said at the beginning, you have no responsibility over somebody doing the personal growth work and changing their attachment styles. You can be there to support them, but it's not your responsibility to solely change somebody's attachment styles. It's theirs, and equally it's yours listening to this. So we're going to talk about how you can change your attachment style. So it is a process that requires, self-awareness, reflection, supportive therapy, some sessions and some time and space to really understand yourself, because a lot of the time it will stem back to some core wounds, childhood, stuff like that. So doing some inner child work is a really good thing that you can do and explore in your childhood to really help with your attachment styles. And then how this is manifesting in your adult life. So first one, self-reflection and awareness. So I hope when you listen to this podcast episode, you get off and you recognize more your current attachment styles. Spend time reflecting on your past relationships and how you tended to respond to emotional closeness, to intimacy, and definitely to conflict. How would you respond to that? And be honest with yourself about any patterns that you notice. So again, this is what I was saying before around bringing shadow in and not judging self for that. But in order for you to change your attachment style, you've got to be super, super honest with yourself, and you've really got to reflect on how you would show up. And sometimes that's uncomfortable, but it's in facing that uncomfortability that you really allow yourself to grow into a secure attachment. Identify your triggers and your insecurities. So, specific situations or triggers that activate your attachment related insecurities and anxieties. So things will play out, insecurities that will stem from your attachment style and the way that you feel in that relationship. So when you understand what specific situations and triggers activate that, you're then aware of your emotional reactions. So what you can do is you can spot that playing out in the moment. You can have that self-awareness, and then you can come in and almost interject that loop that's naturally happening, that's being formed. You give yourself that moment where you're able to break that cycle, that loop, and then play out a new behavior. And this can take practice over time. It's not an overnight thing, changing any, trigger that we have, any automatic pattern that's playing out in our behavior. It does take repetition and patience and compassion, but it's 100% doable. Challenge your negative beliefs. So, question and challenge any negative beliefs about yourself or your relationship. So if you believe you're unworthy of love, or that it's inevitable that somebody's going to abandon you, in therapy, you work on reframing those beliefs and replacing them with realistic, positive, more self-loving ones. And, this is where we see parts of this come out in trauma, because we see a lot of negative beliefs, play out when somebody has experienced maybe trauma, maybe if there's some deep-rooted beliefs around body image, maybe someone's had experiences where it's being reinforced that someone's going to cheat on you, somebody's going to leave you. And often our attachment styles, because they play out certain behaviours, what it means is that certain cycles can repeat naturally as a loop of our attachment styles and our behaviours. So it's we don't realise it, but what's happening is these same cycles keep repeating out. If you consistently keep getting cheated on, that's not your fault if you're getting cheated on, by the way, but it's just an example of if you're in these situations where a partner keeps that behavior keeps happening, it's what can I look at in terms of me, tolerance levels, any negative beliefs that are quite are playing out that's making me, or any behaviors that I do that's operating from an unconscious place. Maybe there's a part of me that pushes partners away. Maybe there's a part of me that doesn't get intimate and let my partners get close to me. And that over time, maybe your partner feels starved of affection, and that could be something that results in cheating. It doesn't mean that you're responsible for that behavior or that pain caused. But what it just means is that when you look at your part, it really helps you understand yourself better. And really start to replace, these behaviors and these negative beliefs with more realistic and positive and just more fucking loving behaviors, really, and beliefs. So you want to also develop ways to regulate your emotional set points. So having resources and techniques that allow you to manage intense emotions is really important. So again, this is something that you get from therapy, especially therapy with me, is we aim to build internal resources that you can lean on for you to go to when you feel overwhelmed. So that could be mindfulness, deep breathing, it could be grounding, it could be go in the gym, it could be affirmations, whatever's works for you. And what that allows you to do is regulate yourself, which can help you respond more calmly and rationally in situations. So if I compare that to me in my early 20s, absolutely had no skills to be able to regulate myself emotionally, hence why I would blow off the handle. And I grew up in a family that were all pretty much like that. We just bubbled over and then we would blow. Now I'm able to regulate. So what that means is I take myself away from a situation, I process, I understand, I let the emotion, the high levels of emotion like subside. So then I can just kind of be more rational. I'm not acting from a place that's like really emotionally triggered. And then I come back into space and I communicate from that space, and that's really helpful. So there's many, many ways that you can do that, many skills that you can lean on, and usually they are really simple skills. And this is something that therapy helps you understand. Supportive relationships, again, is a way that you can start to change your attachment style. So being able to speak to people, being able to, communicate with your partner, understanding your partner's attachment behaviours, those like really helpful, positive relationships that you have in your life, lean on those. And another big part of like the relationship aspect is the communication skills. So really improving the way that you communicate, especially when it comes to your needs, your feelings, your boundaries, being able to communicate those effectively so you feel seen, because what that does is that really fosters like a deep sense of trust and intimacy in a relationship. When you can communicate your wants and needs and your boundaries, and you see that they're respected and held, that really is going to help you start to shift into this secure attachment. Therapy is another big one, that's huge, because you're working with a trained professional who understands attachment theory. You're working with somebody like me, for example. If you were to come into space with me, I have this in my awareness. So then anything that when you're talking through things, there's going to be certain things that I pinpoint and I'm able to help you work through in therapy. I think just like, again, something else I wrote down was vulnerability and staying open. I think, when you're on this personal growth journey, you just have to be really open to learning, and you just have to be really willing to adapt and adjust your behaviours, based on new insights and understanding that you get, and, knowing that it does take effort to change your attachment style, but it's absolutely 100% possible. And just practicing being vulnerable. I think when you're vulnerable with these parts of self and you're able to look at yourself a little bit more openly and honestly, like it really helps you form deep connections and just feel trusted and seen. So the last part that I want to go into is how trauma impacts attachment. It can significantly influence how people form and maintain relationships, and it can disrupt like the normal development of attachment. So if you've experienced childhood trauma, this is one of the reasons why it was quite important for me to mention it, because it can, if our attachment style comes from our early formative years and that's when you experience some trauma, well then that's going to actually have a disruption on the normal development of attachment styles, which can lead to like challenges. So I'm just going to go into some ways that, trauma can actually play out in terms of attachment. And I think when you're doing any work to heal your trauma, naturally this is going to be helping with your level of security in self. I think, that's a big thing. That's why the work that I do now is really around women finding that level of safety in self, because when they find that level of safety, that for me feels like the first piece in the puzzle to securely attaching with people. If you can feel secure in yourself, that's just such a huge step forward for anybody who's experienced trauma. So some ways that trauma can impact attachment. First one, lead to an insecure attachment. So insecure attachment styles, we spoke about anxious avoidant, fearfully avoidant. So when you experience trauma as a child, or you experience inconsistent caregiving during your early years, you may struggle to form that secure attachment, and it can result in difficulties, like I've pretty much said, but trusting others, seeking or maintaining emotional closeness, and appropriately expressing your emotions in relationships. So especially I think if you've experienced trauma and there's that level of disassociation and, disconnection, part of somebody getting close to you is potentially them getting close to the part of you that's experienced trauma. Now, if you've shut that out, it means that you're disconnected from yourself. So for anybody else to get close to that can feel really overwhelming, which means that, you know, you may have difficulty getting close to people, letting people in, or even trusting others, because again, you know, if you've experienced trauma, somebody has massively broken some level of trust, you know, even that, you know, autonomy with self, that's like a big thing, like for you to feel like safe and like in control of your body. If somebody breaks that, that's like trust in a different way, but you will still, but it can manifest in ways that you wouldn't necessarily think is related to your trauma. But like distrust in other people can be a way that you see it manifest. Fear of abandonment, another big one. You know, especially if you've experienced any specific like abandonment or neglect, that can instill like a really, really deep fear of being left or rejected by others. I think trauma as well is something that can trigger a fear of abandonment, because it's like so many people disconnect and disassociate from it and carry so much shame around their trauma. So if you carry shame around that and you reject that part of self and you disconnect from that part of self, well then the thought of letting anybody to see that part of you, you know, there could be a sense of, if they know this about me, if they see the shame, if they know how ashamed I feel in my body, if they know anything of what's happened to me, they're just going to reject me and they're going to leave me. And this can really play out in adulthood, which can influence dynamics massively and lead to behaviours that either push people away or cling to them intensely. So again, this is where we can see those really, really unhealthy, behaviours play out. The third one, emotional regulation challenges, because trauma disrupts the development of healthy emotional regulation. Again, when we think about disassociation, when we think about disconnecting, essentially it means that we shut down from like the body, and the body is where, you know, the nervous system is, where that emotional regulation is, where we feel our feelings. So when we disconnect, it means that there's a level of, it means that disconnect essentially means that you're not able to self-regulate or self-soothe, because you're not connected to the mechanism and the organism that needs you to be connected to it. And a lot of the time people with trauma don't actually understand the feeling. They either don't feel feelings or they don't know what the feeling is, because of the level of disconnect or disassociation in the body. So it means you may struggle to manage your emotions effectively, lead to a big emotional outburst, withdrawals, and emotional numbing as well, which means that you're unable to navigate emotional experiences within relationships, and it feels easier and safer to just completely shut down often and just to leave situations that are asking you to be connected and be present. Because when trauma is in the body, it also hijacks the level of presence that you're able to have in your life. And in a relationship, your partner may want presence, and you know that can in itself can be overwhelming. So hypervigilance and trust issues is another way. So trauma can heighten hypervigilance, and it can create difficulties in trusting others, like we spoke about. So if you've experienced trauma, you might consistently be on high alert. Again, you might be aware of this, you might not be aware of this, but what hypervigilance means is that you're consistently looking for danger or harm from others, from your environment, you know, any situation in your life, you go into it and you're on high alert, which can really, really impact how you connect with other people and how trusting you are in relationships. Disassociation, spoke about that. But disassociation is essentially where individuals detach from their emotions and disconnect from their sense of self. So that sense of self is core self, it is the driver, it is the mechanism that is almost like the center of the universe for us as we go about life, having that sense of self. Disassociation hinders that too, and it also hinders your ability to connect in relationships, and it means that it can create barriers to secure attachment. Another thing is reenactment of trauma. So unconsciously, what you might do is reenact your traumatic experiences in relationships. Again, this can be so jarring and uncomfortable for people who've experienced trauma to feel like they would be reenacting something that caused them so much pain and discomfort and essentially like change their whole lives. And this is something that happens so unconsciously, but there is an element of safety that comes in the familiar. And if the familiar is even something that's traumatic, it's just naturally happening. Because if you feel so unsafe, you will go to anything that can provide that element of safety. So you may reenact your trauma, which means you may seek out situations or partners that replicate familiar patterns. And this can just really perpetuate like those negative and unhealthy attachment dynamics. You see this a lot when I've worked with on the other side of domestic violence. You see this with women who will just consistently get into these violent relationships because it's all they've ever known, and it gives them a sense of control. And that control, even though it doesn't make sense on the surface when we say this out loud, that control makes them feel safe in a way. It's given them all they've ever known. And, I think a lot of people on the surface question that, well, why would you end up in that situation again? But working in these types of dynamics with these types of women just opened my eyes so much to how actually subconsciously and unconsciously that reenactment of trauma can play out. And a lot of the time, when that is playing out, it's very much that avoidant, that anxious, those really unhealthy attachment styles. Avoidance of vulnerability is another one, which I've pretty much explained. And then, the difficulty forming close bonds, which is something else I think I've explained. But it's all about protection, and it's all about, keeping that distress at bay. And we see this play out massively in ways that you then go on to attach with people in relationships. So trauma is just like a whole other undercurrent when it comes to attachment styles. But again, it's not impossible to move to a secure attachment if you've experienced trauma, because you're able to process trauma. People are able to get to the point where that trauma no longer has an emotional charge in the body. Sure, there might be triggers and stuff that come up, but they get to the point where they feel in control of their trauma, like it no longer is like a huge heavy cloud over them. They're able to connect back with their body. They're able to move through emotions and feelings, and they're able to regulate again. And essentially that is just the key of trauma healing, being able to connect to your body, being able to feel safe in your body, and being able to regulate. And in doing that and working on yourself, you're then able to go out and securely attach with other people. So that is today's episode, a little bit of a longer one, a little bit more of like a psychoeducation episode. But I hope you did enjoy. And, like I said in the show notes, I put the book that you can read, you can do the test. And if you would like to work with me, there's also a link below where you can inquire about therapy, about my embodied psychotherapy sessions or my somatic connection sessions. Both of those are beautiful practices that I'm now holding online and in person in Planet Yoga. And they're really just facilitating some wonderful, wonderful healing work with women. So if you are interested, just click the link below and inquire about that. And I shall see you next week for another episode of the podcast.